The sand was hot under my feet, and the breeze off the ocean barely cut through the thick humidity. I stood on the edge of a cliff, looking out at the endless blue horizon. It was the final day of our shoot on this tropical island, but the weight on my chest felt heavier than the air. Tomorrow, I would return home with a woman who had betrayed me. My wife, Molly, stood just a few feet away, chatting with the crew, laughing as though nothing had happened. Her blonde hair shimmered in the sunlight. Her smile as bright as ever. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect co-host, the perfect wife. But I knew better. I knew her dirty little secret. It all started a few months ago. At first, it was nothing. Just small things that I chalked up to the stress of our travel schedule. She started getting distant, missing our calls, or brushing me off with weak excuses. Then there were the late nights. She'd claim she was tired, but somehow, she'd always end up staying out longer than the rest of us. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong, but something inside me kept tugging, pushing me to dig deeper. The moment that shattered everything came one evening after we wrapped up a long shoot in the Amazon. I went back to the van we used as our mobile dressing room to grab a change of clothes. Molly had left her phone behind, unlocked. I wasn't snooping, at least not consciously. The screen lit up with a text message. It was from Scott, our cameraman. "Can't wait for tomorrow night. Last night was perfect. You make me feel alive again." The blood drained from my face. I stared at the message, frozen. My mind raced to make sense of it, but there was no explaining this away. I scrolled up through their conversation, and each new message was another knife twisting deeper into my gut. They'd been sneaking around for weeks, meeting up after shoots, laughing behind my back. I wanted to confront her right there. I wanted to smash the phone and rip the whole charade apart. But I didn't. Instead, I took screenshots of their conversations. I began to plan my next move. They thought they had gotten away with it. They thought I was oblivious. But I wasn't. No, I was biding my time. This show we were filming, this final episode of the season, would be the perfect stage for their downfall. And I was going to make sure the entire world watched as their lies crumbled around them. Molly called out to me, her voice sweet and warm, like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't stabbing me in the back every chance she got. I plastered on a smile and waved, playing my part as the loving husband and co-host, while my mind spun with the details of my revenge. We had been working together on this travel show for years. Wanderlust, it was called. The audience loved our chemistry, Molly and I, the married couple living the dream, exploring the world together. What a joke, if only they knew the truth. But soon, they would. Soon, the whole world would see what a lying, cheating fraud Molly really was. As the sun began to set, we gathered for the evening wrap-up. Molly and Scott stood side by side, laughing with the crew as if they were the stars of the show, completely unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. Tomorrow, we were supposed to film the final segment, a romantic sunset stroll along the beach, just the two of us. A perfect ending to the season. But I had other plans. I had made sure that tomorrow's episode would be one to remember. The morning sun filtered through the open curtains of our hotel room, casting long shadows on the floor. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the gentle sound of waves crashing outside. Molly was in the bathroom, humming as she got ready for the day. Her voice, once comforting, now felt like nails on a chalkboard. I could almost see her in there, fixing her hair, putting on that bright smile she wore so well for the camera, and for Scott. Today was the day I would end it all. I rolled out of bed and pulled on a t-shirt, pretending to go over the final script for today's shoot. Molly stepped out of the bathroom, glowing in her usual effortless way. She glanced at me and smiled, completely oblivious to the bomb I was about to drop on her life. "Ready for the big finale?" she asked, her tone light and carefree. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "It's going to be unforgettable." She nodded, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek before heading out the door to meet Scott and the crew. The kiss felt like poison on my skin. I wanted to wipe it away, but I held back. Everything had to seem normal. She couldn't suspect a thing. Not yet. Once the door clicked shut, I took a deep breath and reached for my phone. I opened the files I had carefully saved, the texts, the photos, everything. They were all waiting, perfectly arranged, ready to go live. But that would come later. First, I needed to set the stage. I walked down to the beach where the crew was setting up for the final scene. Scott was already there, fiddling with his camera gear, his back to me. For a moment, I considered confronting him right there, throwing him to the sand and demanding answers. But that wasn't part of the plan. I had something much better in store for him. "Hey, Kev," Scott called over his shoulder, giving me a friendly wave as if he hadn't been sleeping with my wife behind my back. I waved back, my hand tight around the phone in my pocket. "Looking good, man," I said, pretending to check the camera setup. "Today's going to be big." Scott grinned. "Yeah, I've got some great shots planned for you too. That sunset's gonna be killer." He had no idea. Molly joined us a few minutes later, her energy electric as always. She slipped into her role effortlessly, flashing her dazzling smile for the camera. To the crew, we looked like the picture-perfect couple, living the dream, traveling the world together, exploring tropical islands hand in hand. But today wasn't just about travel. Today was about the truth. The crew began filming, capturing shots of us walking along the beach, holding hands, laughing like everything was fine. I played my part, though every step felt heavier than the last. My heart pounded in my chest, not from love, but from the anticipation of what was coming. After an hour, we took a break. I excused myself, heading back to the tech tent where the editing crew worked. My heart raced as I handed them a flash drive. "Hey, I've got some footage I want to add to the final cut." "It's a surprise for Molly," I said, my voice casual. The tech team nodded, loading the files onto their system without question. No one suspected a thing. They didn't need to. All they knew was that it was my show too, and if I wanted to make a last-minute addition, I had every right. The files I'd given them looked like standard travel shots, sunsets, beach scenes, the usual. But hidden in the last few minutes were the real treasures. The photos of Molly and Scott were taken over the past few months when they thought no one was watching. The secret texts, the stolen kisses. All of it is perfectly timed to appear at the climax of the episode. I returned to the set just as Molly and Scott were chatting, their heads closed, laughing at some inside joke. My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. I had to. The cameras rolled again as we filmed the final scene. A romantic stroll down the beach, the sun setting behind us, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Molly slipped her hand into mine, and I smiled for the camera, knowing that soon, her entire world would crumble. As the sun dipped lower, the director called for the wrap-up. Molly turned to me, beaming. "This is perfect," she said. "The best ending we could have asked for." I looked into her eyes, holding her gaze for just a second longer than normal. "Yeah," I said softly. "It really is." But she had no idea just how perfect it was about to get. We finished the shoot, and the crew began packing up for the day. Molly and Scott hung back, chatting in hushed tones, probably making plans for later. I didn't care. I knew that by the time they realized what I had done, it would be too late. The final cut of the episode will air tomorrow evening. I wouldn't need to say a word. The footage would speak for itself. The entire world would see them for what they really were: liars, cheaters, frauds. And when it was all over, I'd walk away, leaving them both in the ruins of their perfect little lie. The day had finally arrived. Tonight, millions of people will sit down to watch the season finale of Wanderlust. Our fans would expect another feel-good episode, the kind where Molly and I explore some exotic paradise, laughing and smiling our way through another picture-perfect destination. But this time, they'd get something different. Something real. I sat in my hotel room, staring at the black TV screen, waiting for the broadcast to start. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, messages from friends, colleagues, and people who had no idea what was coming. They were all excited to see the episode, to see Molly and me play our roles one last time. Molly had gone out earlier, claiming she needed to clear her head before the big night. I knew better. She was probably with Scott, stealing one last moment before the world found out who they really were. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the way she laughed behind my back with him. And any sympathy I might have had disappeared. I checked the time. 15 minutes until the episode aired. I could only imagine what Molly and Scott were thinking right now. Probably still wrapped up in their little fantasy, completely unaware of the nightmare that was about to unfold. My heart pounded as I grabbed the remote and turned on the TV. The familiar intro music played, the upbeat theme that had opened every episode of Wanderlust for years. There we were on screen, Molly and me, the perfect couple, walking hand in hand through the jungle, trekking up mountains, diving into crystal clear waters. Every shot was a lie. Every smile was a mask. The first half of the episode went as planned. Molly and I stood on the beach, the sun setting behind us, delivering our well-rehearsed lines about the beauty of the island. The magic of travel, and the bond we shared. I could almost hear the audience sighing, thinking we were the perfect team. But the real show hadn't started yet. Halfway through the episode, during what should have been a transition to more scenic shots of the island, the screen flickered. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. This was it. The first image appeared, grainy at first, but unmistakable. Molly and Scott, standing too close for just colleagues, her hand resting on his chest. Then another. The two of them, kissing in the shadows of a dimly lit hallway. A stolen moment captured by the hidden camera I'd planted weeks ago. The next shot showed them again, this time in a hotel room, wrapped in each other's arms, completely unaware of the camera watching them. The images came one after another, every stolen moment laid bare for the world to see. For a few seconds, the screen went silent. No voiceovers, no music, just the sound of the ocean in the background, as if nature itself had gone quiet to witness their betrayal. Then came the texts, flashes of their conversations, their plans to meet up, their pathetic little secrets, all displayed in bold white letters against the scenic backdrop of the island. I imagined Molly's face as she watched, her horror growing with every image. And Scott, he must have been sitting there, frozen in disbelief, realizing that everything they thought they'd kept hidden was now being broadcast to millions. My phone buzzed again. This time, the messages were different. Confusion, shock. People asked what was going on. Viewers, friends, and colleagues had just witnessed the destruction of Molly's career, her public persona torn apart in the most spectacular fashion. But I wasn't done yet. As the final image faded from the screen, the episode cut back to Molly and me, standing on the beach, ready to deliver our closing remarks. Except now, everything was different. There was no more perfect couple, no more facade. Molly looked out at the camera, smiling, completely unaware that her life had just imploded. "Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey," she said, her voice sweet and sincere. "Kevin and I have loved every moment, and we can't wait to share more adventures with you in the future." The irony was almost too much to bear. The episode ended, and the screen went black. Silence filled the room, but my mind buzzed with the aftermath of what I'd just unleashed. Molly's career, her reputation, everything she'd built was gone. The contracts she'd fought so hard to secure, the sponsors that adored her, they'd drop her by morning. And Scott? He wouldn't fare much better. The network wouldn't tolerate this kind of scandal. They'd cut ties with him just as fast. They'd both be left in the wreckage of their lies, scrambling to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the ocean. The water was calm, the sky darkening as the sun disappeared below the horizon. It felt like the perfect metaphor. Molly's sun had set, and she had no idea how to survive in the dark. My phone rang. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Molly. She'd seen the episode by now. She'd know exactly what I'd done. But I didn't answer. Let her sit in it. Let her stew in the mess she'd made. For the first time in months, I felt a weight lift off my chest. The anger, the betrayal, the helplessness, it was all gone, replaced by a sense of calm. I had taken back control. I had shown them both that I wasn't some clueless fool to be toyed with. Tomorrow, I'd pack my bags and leave. I wouldn't look back. As for Molly and Scott, they were left to deal with the wreckage. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. My phone was buzzing non-stop, calls, texts, emails. The aftermath of the episode was exactly what I expected, only bigger. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Journalists, TV execs, even old friends who hadn't bothered to check in for years, they all wanted answers. I ignored most of it, scrolling through the headlines. Wanderlust finale turned scandalous. Molly exposed. Betrayal in paradise. TV star caught in affair. The tabloids were having a field day. They'd latched onto every juicy detail, dissecting the footage, analyzing every stolen glance between Molly and Scott. I could practically see the buzz swirling online, the hashtags trending, the memes forming. And Molly, she was everywhere. Pictures of her perfect, shocked face from the final scene of the episode, juxtaposed with the incriminating footage I had released. There was no escape for her now. I flipped through the messages piling up in my inbox. Sponsors were already cutting ties. I spotted a few emails from her agent. "We need to talk. Damage control. Call me ASAP." I could almost hear the panic in their voices as they realized how impossible it would be to salvage her career after this. As I sipped my coffee, a text from an unfamiliar number caught my eye. It was short, but I knew who it was from immediately. "You son of a bitch. How could you do this to me? Molly." I smirked and set the phone down, letting her words hang there, unanswered. She didn't deserve a response. Not after everything she'd done. By mid-morning, the calls became more frantic. I finally picked up when I saw the name of our network executive flash on the screen. "Kevin, what the hell happened last night?" His voice boomed before I could even say hello. "Do you realize the firestorm you've created? The show's tanking and sponsors are pulling out left and right. Molly's team is threatening legal action." "Is that so?" I said, keeping my voice calm, almost bored. I'd expected this. They had no idea what was coming. "You think this is a joke?" He snapped. "You've wrecked the entire show. We were gearing up for another season. How the hell do you think we recover from this?" I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. "There's no recovery," I said slowly. "Not for Wanderlust, not for Molly, and sure as hell not for Scott. This show was over the moment they decided to screw me over." Jesus, Kevin," he groaned. "I know you're pissed, but was this really the way to handle it?" "Actually, it was," I said, my voice cold and steady. "They deserved to be exposed. The audience deserved to know the truth. Do you think I was going to let them keep parading around like everything was fine? Like I didn't exist?" A long pause followed. I could hear him trying to figure out how to play this, how to salvage what was left of the wreckage. But there wasn't much left to save. "Listen," he finally said, his tone softer. "You're a valuable asset to the network, Kevin. I'm not saying what you did was right, but you're still a name we can work with. Molly's done, that's clear. But you could walk away clean. Maybe even get your own show out of this." I laughed bitterly. "I'm done with this business. Done with the show. I didn't do this to get ahead. I did this to show them they can't walk all over people like me and get away with it." He tried to protest, to convince me that walking away now would be a mistake. But I wasn't listening. I was already packing my bag, throwing my clothes into a suitcase with a sense of finality I hadn't felt in months. The life I'd built with Molly was over. The show was over. And that was exactly what I wanted. After I hung up, I looked out the window, watching the waves roll lazily onto the shore. It was the same view Molly and I had admired together when we first started the show. Back then, everything seemed perfect. I'd loved her, or at least I thought I had. But now, looking back, I realized how blind I'd been. I wasn't mourning the end of our relationship anymore. I was ready to move on. Just as I zipped up my bag, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Molly standing there, her face pale and drawn. She looked nothing like the glowing woman who'd smiled for the camera just days ago. Her eyes were red as if she hadn't slept, and her voice was shaky when she spoke. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside, letting her walk in. She stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of my half-packed suitcase, the clear signs that I was leaving. "So, this is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're just going to leave? After everything we've been through?" I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, taking in the full weight of her betrayal. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd shared so many years and memories with, was gone. And in her place was this stranger, someone I didn't even recognize. "You did this to us. Molly," I finally said, my voice low but steady. "You destroyed everything." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a split second, I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered the messages, the lies, the way she'd chosen Scott over me time and time again. Any sympathy I had vanished. "I made a mistake," she whispered, stepping closer. "But what you did, it's unforgivable, Kevin. You ruined my career, my life." I shrugged. "Yeah, well, maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to cheat." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she just stared at me, her expression a mixture of anger and regret. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out the door, leaving it swinging open behind her. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a cold emptiness where once there had been love. With Molly gone, I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door. There was nothing left for me here. The island, the show, Molly, they were all part of a past I no longer wanted any part of. As I walked out of the hotel and into the blazing midday sun, I felt lighter and freer. The weight of months of anger and frustration was gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was in control of my life again. I didn't know where I was going next. But one thing was certain, wherever it was, I wouldn't be looking back. The plane cut through the clouds, leaving the island, and everything I knew, far behind. I stared out of the window, watching the endless blue below, the ocean stretching out like a clean slate. The past few days had been a whirlwind, but now, in the quiet of the flight, it all started to sink in. Molly's face haunted me for a moment. The tears in her eyes, the shock on her face as she realized her perfect little world was gone. She'd wanted to play the victim in the end, but the truth was she had been the architect of her own downfall. She'd built that house of cards with Scott, thinking I wouldn't notice, or worse, thinking I wouldn't care. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. The revenge had been perfect. Everything had gone according to plan. But as the adrenaline of it all faded, I wondered what came next. This new chapter of my life was a blank page, one I hadn't yet started writing. As I leaned back in my seat, a flight attendant passed by, asking if I needed anything. I shook my head, lost in thought. I was headed back to LA, where my life had started before Molly, before the show. There was something comforting about returning to the beginning. Maybe I'd figure things out from there. And rebuild from scratch. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the news again. The fallout from the episode was still all over the place. Molly had been dropped by several major brands overnight. Headlines about her scandal were everywhere. Wanderlust star faces career ender as affair scandal rocks show. Kevin Mills breaks silence on Molly's betrayal. Scott Waverly dropped by network after explosive episode. I didn't bother reading the articles. I knew the story better than anyone. I had written it. What caught my attention next, though, was the flood of social media reactions. Fans who once worshipped Molly were turning on her, calling her a fraud, a liar. Some of them were angry with me, too, calling what I did cruel or unnecessary. But most of them understood why I had exposed her. They saw the betrayal for what it was, and many seemed to think I had done the right thing by revealing it. I smiled bitterly at some of the comments. People could be so fickle. A few days ago, Molly was a hero, the perfect TV host with the perfect marriage. Now, she was a villain. It was amazing how fast everything could change. A text message lit up my phone. It was from my lawyer, confirming that the paperwork for the divorce was underway. I felt another weight lift from my shoulders. The end of our marriage would be official soon, and that chapter would be closed for good. The plane's captain came over the intercom, announcing we'd be landing soon. I glanced out of the window again, watching as the familiar skyline of Los Angeles came into view. It felt strange returning after everything. I had left this city as a man who thought he had it all, a career, a wife, a future mapped out in perfect clarity. Now, I was returning with nothing but a suitcase and a world of uncertainty. But there was something liberating in that, too. I wasn't tied to anyone or anything anymore. No show, no wife, no obligations. I could start over completely on my own terms. As the plane touched down and taxied toward the gate, my phone buzzed with another message. This time, it was from a producer I knew from a different network, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. "Hey, Kev, saw what happened with Wanderlust. Tough break. But listen, I've got a new project coming up, and I think you'd be a great fit. Call me when you're ready to talk." I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a flicker of something, hope, maybe, or curiosity. I hadn't thought about what I'd do next. Part of me had assumed I'd walk away from TV for good. That the show with Molly had soured me on the whole industry. But now, with the offer in front of me, I felt the pull of possibility. A fresh start, something entirely my own. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying, leaving the door open for later. There was no rush. I grabbed my bag and stepped off the plane, feeling the warm California breeze hit my face as I walked toward the terminal. The airport was bustling with people, tourists, business travelers, families, all of them rushing toward their own destinations. Their own lives. I walked through the crowd, unnoticed and anonymous. For the first time in years, I wasn't part of a public image and wasn't playing a role for a camera. I was just Kevin. The ride back to my old apartment felt surreal. The building had hardly changed. It still had the same cracked driveway and the same peeling paint on the railings. It was nothing like the glamorous places Molly and I had stayed in over the years. But there was something grounding about it, something real. This was home in a way that none of those places had ever been. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of the old wood floors hitting me. Dusty sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the empty room. There was no furniture here, no reminders of the life I used to share with someone else. Just an empty space waiting to be filled. I dropped my suitcase by the door and stood there for a moment, taking it all in. It felt like the end of one journey and the beginning of something new. I didn't know exactly what that would be yet, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I had survived the betrayal. I had taken control of my story. And now, it was up to me to decide how the next chapter would unfold. The days after my return to LA were strangely quiet. For the first time in years, I had no filming schedule, no early morning flights, no team of people waiting on my every move. It was just me, a bare apartment, and the eerie stillness that followed the storm. I stayed off social media for the most part. I knew what was out there, people dissecting the finale, picking apart every second, turning Molly's downfall into entertainment. The few times I glanced at it, I saw waves of comments, half of them supportive, the other half wondering if I'd gone too far. I didn't care either way. What was done was done. But there was one thing I couldn't avoid, the fallout from Scott. As much as I wanted to forget him, his name kept popping up. The network had officially fired him. Of course, that was no surprise. They couldn't afford the scandal. But it seemed like Scott wasn't willing to fade away quietly. One morning, as I sipped my coffee and tried to focus on the view of the city outside my window, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. Scott Waverly speaks out, Kevin set us up. I clicked the article, reading it through quickly. Scott had given an exclusive interview to some tabloid, spinning the story in his favor. According to him, the whole thing had been a setup, my calculated revenge for a marriage that was already falling apart. He claimed I'd known about the affair for months and had orchestrated the entire episode just to make him and Molly look like villains. He even suggested that I'd manipulated the footage to make it worse than it really was. I laughed bitterly. Classic Scott, twisting the narrative, trying to paint himself as the victim. The truth was, I'd caught them both red-handed. They were just scrambling to save whatever scraps of their reputations they could. But part of me couldn't help feeling a flicker of anger. Even after everything, Scott was still trying to get the last word. Still trying to shift the blame onto me. The thought of him sitting there, smug in his defense, made my blood boil. I tossed my phone onto the couch and stood up, pacing the room. I didn't regret what I'd done, not for a second. But I couldn't let Scott rewrite the ending to this story. I needed to close the door on this chapter once and for all. Later that day, I called my lawyer. It was time to make things official. The divorce papers were nearly ready, but I wanted to make sure there would be no loose ends, and no opportunities for Molly or Scott to claw their way back into my life. Once the call was done, I felt a strange sense of closure. The legal side of things would take care of itself. And as for Scott, well, he could say whatever he wanted. People like him always found a way to weasel out of the consequences. But I knew the truth. And, more importantly, so did he. The next few days blurred together in a routine of small distractions. I ran errands, cleaned out my apartment, and started thinking about what my next move would be. The producer who had texted me about a new project hadn't followed up, and I hadn't reached out either. I wasn't ready yet. Something about diving back into work felt too soon, too raw. Then, one evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset over the city, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something made me pick up. "Kevin? It's Jill," said the voice on the other end. I blinked, trying to place the name. Jill, Molly's agent. I hadn't expected to hear from her. "I'm guessing you know why I'm calling," she said after a brief pause. "We need to talk about the fallout. Molly's. Well, she's in a bad place. The sponsors are gone, the network's cut ties, and the public. You've seen it. She's done." I didn't say anything. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. "Look, Kevin," Jill continued, her voice softening, "I know things between you and Molly are complicated, to say the least. But she's still a person. This is her life. And right now, she's desperate. She's asking for some kind of public statement from you. Something that can help mitigate the damage." I clenched my jaw. The nerve of them. Molly had brought this on herself, and now they wanted me to save her. "I don't owe her anything," I said, my voice hard. "I understand," Jill replied quickly. "I really do. But, it's bad, Kevin. She's not just losing her career. She's losing everything. Her reputation, her future. She made a mistake, but I cut her off. A mistake? She betrayed me, Jill. She and Scott lied to me for months. And you want me to give her a way out? Jill sighed, her tone becoming more urgent. I'm not asking you to fix everything. Just consider saying something. Even if it's just to clarify that this wasn't some elaborate setup on your part. You know how the media twists things. People are starting to think this was all some kind of revenge plot. I paused, weighing her words. Was it worth it? Was there any point in giving Molly even a shred of redemption after what she'd done? I'll think about it, I finally said, then hung up before she could respond. The truth was, I didn't want to think about it. But I knew that ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. The question now was whether I wanted to spend any more of my energy on Molly and Scott, or if it was finally time to let them fade into the background. The next morning, I woke up to a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Jill's call had rattled me, sure, but in the light of day, I realized something. I was done. Done with Molly, with Scott, with everything that came with them. No more drama, no more looking back. I had already gotten my revenge. That part of my life was over, and now I had to focus on what came next. I sat down at the small table in my kitchen, my phone in hand, and typed out a simple statement. It wasn't for Molly. It wasn't for Scott. It was for me, to put a clean end to this whole mess. To everyone who has followed the recent events surrounding Wanderlust, I want to say this: the truth has already been told. There was no setup, no manipulation. Everything that was aired in the season finale happened exactly as it appeared. My decision to share that footage was mine alone. I stand by it. What Molly and Scott did was their choice, and the consequences are theirs to bear. I'm moving forward, and I suggest the rest of you do the same. Thank you for your support. I read it over twice, then hit send, watching as it went out to my followers, the fans of the show, and the media. I imagined Molly seeing it, and Scott too, both of them knowing that this was the final word from me. There would be no interviews and no more public comments. I was done. After sending the statement, I felt lighter. It wasn't the cathartic revenge that the finale had been, but it was closure. For real this time, I could walk away knowing I had said my piece. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small, quiet victories. I unpacked the last of my boxes, set up the apartment just the way I liked it, and took a long walk through the city, my mind clearer than it had been in months. When I got back home that evening, there was another message waiting for me, from the producer I'd ignored earlier. This time, it was more specific. We need to talk about this new show. I think you'd be the perfect host. Call me when you're ready to move forward. I stared at the message for a moment, then smiled. Maybe it was time. Time to move on. Time to build something new, something entirely my own. I picked up the phone, dialed the number, and for the first time in a long while, felt excited about what came next. The meeting with the producer was set for noon, at a sleek cafe in West Hollywood. I hadn't been to this part of town in years, not since Molly and I were first trying to get Wanderlust off the ground. The vibe was different now, less excitement, more quiet anticipation. I arrived early, grabbed a table outside, and ordered a black coffee. As I waited, I scrolled through my emails, seeing a few follow-ups from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Offers to collaborate, invitations to industry events, and, of course, the inevitable tabloid requests for interviews about the finale. I ignored them all. Kevin, a voice snapped me out of my thoughts. I looked up to see Ben, the producer, approaching with a wide grin. He was younger than I remembered. Or maybe just more enthusiastic. He slid into the seat across from me, his energy infectious. Glad you could make it, he said, signaling the waiter. How've you been holding up? I gave a non-committal shrug. I'm still standing. He nodded, understanding the layers beneath my words. Look, I won't sugarcoat it. What you did in that finale was brutal. But it was also genius. People can't stop talking about it. And that's why I'm here, because I think you've got something the industry needs right now. Something real. I sipped my coffee, waiting for him to get to the point. We've got this new concept, Ben continued, leaning forward. It's travel-based, sure, but it's not like Wanderlust. It's more personal. Less about the locations, more about the people, their stories, their lives, their struggles. We want you to be the host. Not as part of a couple, but as yourself. Raw, honest. What do you think? The idea intrigued me. It was different from what I'd done before, more intimate. And there was something appealing about the thought of stepping out from under the shadow of wanderlust. I'd spent so long being half of a duo, the face of a perfect relationship that was anything but perfect. Now, I had the chance to redefine myself. But part of me hesitated. Hosting a show meant going back into the spotlight, reopening doors I'd just closed. Did I really want that? Was I ready to put myself out there again? I'll be honest, Ben, I said slowly. I'm not sure I want to jump back into TV right now. The last few months have been rough. I get it, he said, not missing a beat. But this isn't about wanderlust or Molly or any of that. This is about you, Kevin. It's a fresh start. And the best part? You'll have complete creative control. We want you to tell the stories you care about. No scripts, no manufactured drama. Just real people and real experiences. He let the offer hang in the air, giving me time to process. It was tempting. The idea of having control, of being able to shape my own narrative for once, felt like the right step forward. I'd spent too long letting other people dictate the direction of my life, first with the show and then with Molly's betrayal. Now, I had the chance to take the reins. All right, I said after a long pause. Let's talk. Ben grinned, pulling out his tablet and scrolling through a presentation. You won't regret this. As we dove into the details, locations, potential stories, production timelines, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a while, excitement. Maybe this was exactly what I needed. A new project, something I could pour myself into, something that wasn't tainted by the past. By the time we finished our meeting, I'd agreed to shoot a pilot. It wasn't a commitment to a full season, just a chance to test the waters and see if this new direction felt right. But deep down, I knew it would. As I left the cafe, I couldn't help but feel like a weight had been lifted. The ghosts of Molly and Scott still lingered in the back of my mind. But they weren't as loud as they had been. They were fading, becoming part of a past that I was finally starting to leave behind. I walked down the street, the sun warm on my face, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about what lay ahead. A few weeks later, I found myself standing on the edge of a small village in Mexico, surrounded by hills and open sky. The camera crew was setting up, the light was perfect, and the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and cooking spices. This was it, the pilot. My first step back into the world I thought I had left behind. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't about tourism or promoting resorts. It was about telling the real stories of the people who lived here, about understanding their lives and the challenges they faced. We were here to meet Santiago, a local farmer who had been working the same land his family had owned for generations. His crops had been failing due to droughts, and he was struggling to make ends meet. But instead of giving up, he started working with his neighbors to find sustainable ways to farm and conserve water. It was exactly the kind of story I wanted to tell. No gloss, no pretense. Just people doing their best to survive in a world that was constantly changing. As I walked through the village with Santiago, listening to him talk about his life, I realized something. This was what I had been missing all along. With Wanderlust, everything had been about the surface, beautiful places. Glamorous hotels, perfect vacations. But none of that was real. This was real. And it was worth sharing. The filming went smoothly. The crew was small, just a handful of people, none of whom had worked with Molly or Scott. It was a fresh start for all of us. I felt like I could breathe again, like I was free from the pressure of pretending to be something I wasn't. When the sun started to set, casting a golden glow over the village, we wrapped for the day. I sat down with the crew, sharing a meal with Santiago and his family, feeling more connected to the world around me than I had in a long time. As we ate, I glanced at the camera sitting nearby, the footage we had captured that day waiting to be edited. For the first time since everything had happened, I didn't feel like I was running away from something. I was running towards something new. That night, back in my small hotel room, I got a message from Ben. Saw the dailies. They look incredible. This is going to be big. Kev, get ready. I smiled to myself, setting the phone aside. The next few weeks would be busy, editing the pilot, presenting it to the network, and figuring out if this new chapter of my life was really going to take off. But whatever happened, I knew one thing for sure, I had found my way forward. The past was behind me now. Molly, Scott, Wanderlust, they were all part of a different life, one I had no intention of revisiting. Now, it was just me and the road ahead, full of stories waiting to be told. And for the first time in a long while, I was ready to tell them. The pilot episode had gone better than I could have hoped. The network loved it, the crew was energized, and there was already talk of turning it into a full series. For the first time in months, everything seemed to be falling into place. I was moving forward, leaving the chaos of the past behind. Or so I thought. It was late afternoon when I got a call from Ben. We were wrapping up the last few details before presenting the pilot officially, and I was already thinking about where we could shoot the next episode. I answered the phone, expecting a routine conversation, but his voice had a strange tone to it. "Kevin, there's something you should know," he started, hesitating. "We've got a little situation." I paused, my gut instinct telling me this wasn't going to be good news. "What kind of situation?" "You're not going to like this, but Molly's back in town. And she's trying to pitch a new show. Apparently, she's shopping it around to some of the same networks we're in talks with. There's been some chatter that she might want to make a big public appearance soon. You know, to clear her name after everything that happened." The name hit me like a punch to the stomach. Molly. I hadn't heard from her since the day we finalized the divorce. I had put all that behind me, or at least, I thought I had. "She's pitching a show?" I asked, trying to wrap my head around the idea. The last I'd heard, she was blacklisted from every major network after the scandal. "Yeah," Ben confirmed, sounding uncomfortable. "Some of the execs are intrigued. Apparently, she's trying to spin it as a redemption arc. The woman scorned, rebuilding her life, finding herself again. You know how the industry loves a comeback story." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. Molly had always been good at playing the victim, but hearing that she was trying to use our history to stage her return felt like a betrayal all over again. I had gone through hell to move past her, and now she was clawing her way back into the spotlight, dragging our story along with her. "What do you want to do about it?" Ben asked, clearly unsure how to proceed. "I don't want to do anything," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "Let her pitch whatever she wants. I'm not going to get dragged into her mess again." But the truth was, it was already eating at me. The thought of Molly trying to turn herself into some kind of hero, rewriting the story to make it seem like she was the one who had been wronged, made my skin crawl. I had exposed the truth during that final episode of Wanderlust, and she had lost everything because of it. Now, she was trying to manipulate the narrative again. Ben must have sensed my hesitation because he quickly added, "I just thought you should know. Whatever she's planning, it's already making waves. You might want to be ready for anything." I thanked him for the heads up and hung up, sitting in silence for a long time. Molly's return to the public eye was the last thing I expected, and it threw me off balance in a way I hadn't felt in a while. Just when I thought I was free, she was back, stirring up the past. Threatening to rewrite the story we had left behind. I knew I couldn't let it get to me, but it was hard. Memories of the betrayal, the lies, and the public humiliation came flooding back. I had built something new, something good, and now Molly was looming in the background, ready to tear it down. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Should I respond publicly if she tried to drag me into her comeback tour? Should I stay quiet and let her flail on her own? What if the network started buying into her story? It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that I made my decision. I wasn't going to let her derail my life again. Whatever Molly was planning, it didn't matter. I had a new show, a new direction, and a clean slate. I wasn't going to let her pull me back into the mess we had left behind. If Molly wanted a comeback, she could have it. But it wouldn't involve me. Not this time. Days passed, and I pushed the thought of Molly's return to the back of my mind. I had too much to focus on with the new show. The network had officially greenlit the series, and we were already scouting locations for the next episode. The excitement of building something new kept me grounded, reminding me that I had moved on. But Molly wasn't done with me yet. I was in the middle of a meeting with the producers, going over some logistics for our next shoot in Iceland when my phone buzzed. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something made me glance down. It was a message from Ben. "Molly just dropped an interview. You're going to want to see this." My heart sank. I excused myself from the meeting and stepped outside, leaning against the building as I pulled up the link he'd sent. It was an exclusive interview with a major entertainment outlet, the kind of puff piece designed to rehabilitate an image. The headline alone made my stomach twist. "Molly Jacobs speaks out, my truth after Wanderlust and Betrayal." I clicked play, and there she was. Molly, polished, poised, playing the part of the victim to perfection. She sat in a beautifully lit studio, her eyes filled with just the right amount of sadness. The interviewer wasted no time, diving straight into the scandal. "So, Molly, it's been almost a year since Wanderlust ended in such dramatic fashion. You've stayed quiet for a long time. Why speak out now?" Molly sighed, glancing down as if she was gathering her thoughts. "I needed time to heal," she said softly. "Everything happened so fast, and the narrative was completely out of my control. I was painted as the villain, and I wasn't ready to defend myself. But now, I think it's time to tell my side of the story." I clenched my fists, feeling the anger rise. Her side of the story? As if she hadn't been the one who tore everything apart. The interviewer leaned in as if she were about to uncover some hidden truth. There were rumors of infidelity and, of course, that final episode where Kevin exposed those photos. Molly's eyes filled with tears, perfectly timed, just like everything else she did. "That was the hardest part," she whispered. "Kevin and we weren't perfect. We had our issues, like any couple. But what people don't know is how disconnected we had become long before the cameras captured it. I'm not excusing what happened, but there's more to it than just those pictures. I felt abandoned, emotionally neglected. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. She was turning the story around, making it seem like I had pushed her to cheat, like it was my fault for not being present. I wanted to throw my phone across the street, but I kept watching, unable to tear my eyes away." "And what about Scott, the cameraman?" the interviewer asked. "There were rumors you two were involved for months before Kevin found out." Molly shook her head, her voice trembling. "Scott and I were close, yes, but it wasn't what people think. We connected during a difficult time, and it was a mistake, but it wasn't this long-running affair that people have made it out to be. Kevin was gone emotionally, and I felt lost. Scott was just there. It took everything in me not to scream." She was rewriting history, twisting the narrative to make herself the victim of circumstance, downplaying her betrayal as some kind of emotional mishap. By the time the interview ended, Molly had positioned herself as the sympathetic figure. The woman who made a mistake but was ready to rebuild her life. The comeback story everyone loves to see. And then came the kicker. The interviewer smiled, clearly in awe of Molly's ability to turn the conversation in her favor. "So, what's next for you, Molly? You mentioned a new project?" Molly brightened, the sadness slipping away as she shifted into promotion mode. "Yes, I'm very excited about my new show. It's going to be called Second Chances. It's about rediscovering yourself after life knocks you down. We're going to travel the world and meet people who've gone through struggles of their own, sharing their stories of redemption and growth. I've been through a lot, and I want to help others heal, too." The words second chances echoed in my head. She was trying to turn her entire betrayal into a brand, using the same formula that had made Wanderlust successful, but with a shiny new twist. She was positioning herself as the comeback queen, all while conveniently glossing over the truth of what she had done. I turned off the interview, seething. Molly had found a way to worm herself back into the industry, and worse, she was doing it by exploiting our past. She hadn't just moved on, she was making sure everyone saw her as the one who had overcome adversity, at my expense. That night, I couldn't sleep. The anger festered, eating away at me. I had worked so hard to distance myself from her, to build something new. But now it felt like Molly was pulling me back into the mess, trying to rewrite the past so she could come out on top. The next morning, Ben called. "You saw it, right?" "Yeah," I said, my voice clipped. "I saw it." Ben hesitated. "Look, we're getting some questions from the network. They're wondering if you're going to respond. I mean, this interview is making waves. And people are starting to ask where you stand in all this." I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The last thing I wanted was to get dragged into a public feud with Molly, but staying silent made it look like I was guilty of the very things she was accusing me of: neglect and emotional abandonment. "I don't know, Ben," I muttered. "I'm not sure if I want to dignify her lies with a response." "I get that, but you might need to say something. She's spinning the narrative in her favor. And if you stay quiet, people are going to start assuming she's right." I let out a long breath, realizing he was right. If I didn't say something, Molly would control the story. And I couldn't let that happen. Not again. "All right," I said, a plan forming in my mind. "Let's schedule something, but I'm not going to play her game. If I respond, I'm going to do it on my terms." Ben sounded relieved. "I knew you'd come around. Let's set it up. We'll make sure it's handled the right way." I hung up, feeling a new resolve settle in. Molly wanted to make a spectacle of her so-called redemption, but I wasn't going to let her drag me through the mud to do it. This time, I'd be ready for her. The decision to go public with my side of the story weighed on me for days. Part of me hated the idea of getting sucked back into the drama, but Ben was right. If I stayed silent, I'd lose control of the narrative. Molly had already turned herself into the wronged woman, and the longer I waited, the worse it would get. We arranged for the interview to be shot at my house, away from the glitz and manufactured setups of a studio. I didn't want it to feel scripted, and I certainly wasn't about to stage a tear-filled redemption arc. I just wanted to set the record straight. The interviewer, Julia, was someone I trusted. We had worked together a few times in the past, and she wasn't the type to twist things for the sake of a more dramatic headline. When she arrived, I greeted her at the door, trying to shake off the nerves. We sat in the living room, just the two of us, while the camera crew set up in the background. "So, Kevin," Julia began as the cameras rolled. "There's been a lot of talk lately about Molly's interview. I know you've stayed quiet for a long time, but I'm curious, why speak out now?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "I've been focused on moving forward with my life, Julia. I didn't want to dwell on the past. But after seeing Molly's interview, I realized that if I didn't address some of the things she said, people might start believing them. I'm not here to start a fight, I just want to tell the truth." Julia nodded, her expression calm, encouraging me to continue. "Molly and I were together for a long time," I said, my voice steady. "We built Wanderlust from the ground up, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. But behind the scenes, things weren't as great as they looked. We had our problems, like any couple. But the truth is, Molly made choices that destroyed our marriage." I paused, choosing my words carefully. I won't deny that we drifted apart emotionally. It happens when you work together as intensely as we did. But to say I was gone emotionally? That I wasn't there for her? That's just not true. I was there, fighting for our relationship, right up until the day I found out about her affair. Julia's eyes flickered, sensing the gravity of my words. "The affair with Scott?" I nodded. "Yes. Scott was our cameraman. He was someone I trusted, someone who was supposed to be part of our team. Finding out about their relationship was like a punch to the gut. And it wasn't just a brief mistake like Molly claims. It had been going on for months, behind my back. The memory of that day hit me hard, but I pushed through it. When I exposed the affair during that final episode of Wanderlust, I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I was hurt. I wanted the truth out there because I felt like I had been living a lie for so long. It wasn't the right way to handle it, and I regret how public it became. But I don't regret showing people who she really is." Julia's voice softened. "And now she's pitching a new show, Second Chances. How do you feel about that?" "I think everyone deserves a second chance," I said, keeping my tone measured. "But what bothers me is the way she's twisting the narrative to make it seem like she's the victim. Molly isn't the one who was betrayed. She's trying to rewrite history to fit this new image she wants to sell, but the truth is still out there. I just want people to know what really happened." The interview wrapped up shortly after that. Julia thanked me for my honesty, and I could tell she respected the fact that I hadn't gone for cheap shots or dragged Molly through the mud more than necessary. I wanted the truth out there, but I wasn't going to turn it into a spectacle. As the crew packed up and left, I sat in the quiet of my house, feeling both relieved and exhausted. I had said what needed to be said, and now it was out of my hands. The interview would air next week, and the public would decide what to believe. But no matter what happened, I knew one thing for sure: I had spoken my truth, and I was done letting Molly control the story. The interview aired on a Thursday night, and by Friday morning, my phone was blowing up. Ben was the first to call. "Kevin, man, you nailed it," he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "I've been getting calls all morning. The network loves how you handled it. No drama, just honesty. People are really responding to it." I thanked him, but in truth, I hadn't been looking for a pat on the back. I just wanted to move on, to focus on the future instead of being stuck in the past. But the world wasn't done talking about it yet. Articles began popping up online almost immediately. Headlines ranged from "Kevin Wright breaks silence on Molly Jacobs' affair" to "The real story behind the Wanderlust scandal." Social media was flooded with comments, people taking sides, debating who was telling the truth. But the most surprising reaction came from Molly herself. A few days after my interview aired, she posted a statement on her Instagram. It was a long, carefully worded message, accompanied by a photo of her sitting on a beach, looking out at the ocean. An image clearly meant to evoke a sense of introspection and peace. In the post, she didn't deny the affair. Instead, she doubled down on the narrative she had started in her interview, framing the whole thing as a complicated, emotional time in her life. She claimed that my version of events was one-sided, that I had conveniently left out the ways I had hurt her over the years. It was the same song and dance, Molly playing the part of the misunderstood, wounded soul. But what really caught my attention was the last paragraph. I respect Kevin's decision to tell his story, and I understand that he feels wronged. But we were both at fault. Relationships are never black and white, and I hope we can both find peace as we move forward. I'm ready to start my next chapter with second chances, and I'm grateful for all the support I've received. To anyone going through something similar, healing is possible. It was a subtle jab, but it was there. Molly wasn't backing down. She wasn't admitting full responsibility, nor was she walking away from the idea that she had been wronged. And, of course, she used the moment to plug her new show, positioning herself as the face of healing and growth. Ben called me again that afternoon. "So, what do you think?" "She's clearly trying to keep the story going." "I'm not surprised," I muttered. "That's Molly. She's not going to just let it go." "So what's next?" he asked. "You want to respond again, or do we leave it alone?" I thought about it for a moment. The old me might have been tempted to fire back, to go toe-to-toe with her and the media, but I was tired of the back and forth. I had said my piece. Let her spin whatever story she wanted. At the end of the day, the truth was out there, and people could decide for themselves. "I'm done," I said finally. "Let her have her spotlight. I've got better things to focus on." Ben seemed to approve of my decision. "Good call, Kev. You've got bigger things coming. Let's keep our eyes on the prize." And that was it. I let it go. Molly might have won the battle for public sympathy with some people, but I knew what really mattered. I was free from her. Free from the lies, the betrayal, and the constant need to put on a show for the cameras. I had my own show now, my own future. And that was something she couldn't take away from me. As I sat down that evening, looking over some of the early edits from our next episode, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The storm had passed, and I had come out the other side, stronger and more focused than ever. Molly could have her second chance. I was already living mine. Weeks went by, and as the noise surrounding Molly's interview began to fade, my life finally started to feel normal again. I buried myself in work, focusing on the production of my new show. The team was in high spirits, and our first episode had already received strong reviews from the network. It felt good to be building something new from the ground up, something that had nothing to do with Molly or the wreckage of our past. One afternoon, I was in the editing bay, watching some rough cuts of our latest shoot in Iceland. The footage was breathtaking: snow-covered landscapes, towering glaciers, and endless stretches of untouched wilderness. It was exactly the kind of adventure I had always dreamed of capturing on camera. As I watched the footage, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. This was mine. I had made it without her. Just as I was settling into the flow of the edits, Ben burst into the room, his face flushed with excitement. "Kevin, you've got to see this," he said, breathless. He held up his phone, where a live video was playing. "It's Molly. She's doing a live stream." I raised an eyebrow. "And why'd I need to watch it?" "You'll want to hear what she's saying." Reluctantly, I took the phone from him and turned my attention to the screen. Molly was sitting in what looked like a tropical setting, likely one of the locations for her new show. Palm trees swayed gently in the background, and the soft sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the audio. She was talking directly to her audience, her face serious. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," she said, her voice softer than usual. "About my past, my mistakes, and the way I've handled certain things. And I realized that I owe some people an apology. Most of all, Kevin." I blinked, unsure if I had heard her correctly. Molly Jacobs, the queen of deflection, was admitting she was wrong? "I've been so focused on moving forward that I didn't stop to reflect on the hurt I caused," she continued. "I made mistakes. Big ones. I hurt Kevin in ways I never should have, and I wasn't honest about it. I let my pride get in the way of the truth. For that, I'm sorry." Ben glanced at me, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "Did she just?" "Yeah," I muttered, not entirely believing it myself. Molly went on, her tone becoming more personal. Almost vulnerable. "I know I can't undo what I did, and I can't change the past. But I can take responsibility for my actions. Kevin, if you're watching this, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Not for me, but for you. You deserve peace. She ended the stream shortly after that, thanking her audience for their support and signing off with a promise to focus on personal growth in the future. When the screen went dark, I handed the phone back to Ben, still processing what I had just seen. Well, that was unexpected, Ben said, leaning back against the wall. Think she means it? I let out a long breath. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but at this point, it doesn't matter. Ben tilted his head. You really think so? I mean, that was a pretty big moment for her. I know, I said, feeling a strange sense of closure. But I've already moved on. That apology was for her, not for me. She needed to say it, and I needed to hear it. But it doesn't change anything. I'm done with that chapter of my life. Ben nodded, understanding where I was coming from. Well, it looks like this really is the end of the Molly saga, then. Yeah, I said, feeling a surprising sense of relief. I think it is. We returned to the editing process, but the weight I had been carrying for so long seemed lighter. Molly's public apology, whether sincere or not, had given me the final piece of closure I didn't realize I needed. The past was finally behind me, and I could see the future more clearly than ever before. The day our first episode aired was filled with a nervous energy that I hadn't felt in a long time. The crew gathered in the office to watch it together, snacks spread across the table, drinks in hand. There was a buzz of excitement, the kind that only comes when you know you've built something special. As the episode started, I could hardly sit still. The opening shots were everything I had hoped they would be, stunning visuals of Iceland's icy landscapes, combined with the human stories of survival and resilience that we had worked so hard to capture. It was raw, real, and completely different from the glossy, commercialized feel of Wanderlust. This was my vision, my voice, unfiltered and unburdened by the past. About halfway through, I noticed a quiet stillness settle over the room. No one was speaking, their eyes glued to the screen. It was then that I knew we had done something right. When the credits rolled, the room erupted in applause. The tension that had been building in my chest finally released, and I couldn't help but grin as Ben clapped me on the back. Kevin, that was incredible, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. You've outdone yourself. Thanks, I said, feeling a sense of pride that I hadn't felt in a long time. We all have. This was a team effort. We spent the rest of the evening celebrating, but as the night wore on, I found myself stepping outside, away from the noise. The cool evening air hit my face as I leaned against the railing, looking out at the city skyline. The weight of everything, the last year, the betrayal, the hard work, the uncertainty, seemed to lift, leaving me with a sense of peace I hadn't expected. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting another congratulatory message from one of the crew, but it wasn't. It was a text from Molly. I watched the episode. It was beautiful. Congratulations. I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a mix of emotions. There was no bitterness, no anger, just a sense of finality. Molly's chapter in my life was officially closed. I didn't respond, not out of malice, but because there was nothing more to say. The story was over, and we had both moved on. She had her path, and I had mine. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked out at the skyline again. The world felt wide open, full of possibilities. My show was a success, my life was my own again, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was genuinely excited about the future. As I stood there, I realized something important, the betrayal. The heartbreak, the public fallout, it had all shaped me, but it didn't define me. I had found my way through the chaos, and in the end, I had come out stronger. This was my second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. I walked back inside, ready for whatever came next.